Just filming a quick intro because we had some technical issues at the start of our live stream with Christian McBride. Thanks for joining me. I'm Sarah Hicks. Backstage Pass, where I get to talk to my amazing friends and really get behind the scenes of an artist's life to hear what inspires them, what they have passion for, and the kinds of things that drive them to do what they do and to be who they are. This week, my guest is Christian McBride, and we had some issues getting him on, so let's pretend that all happened and we'll start the interview. Are you there, my friend?
Hello there.
Hey, how's it going?
I haven't seen you in ages.
I know, it's been like years, maybe? I've seen you on stage.
Man, this light is whack. Yeah, there we are.
There
That's
we go.
better.
It's a down spot. I love it. How you doing?
Exactly. I'm doing well, my friend. It's great to see you. Yes, it's been years.
Yeah, it's been a long time. Although I did see you at SF Jazz, I think last year on stage, and then I had to scoot right after, so I didn't get to.
Yeah, what was that,
Sorry.
man?
I had my in-laws with me. You know, it happens. We had stuff to do. Yeah, you get it. So, hey, everyone, this is Christian McBride. As you know, I'm going to say a little bio. So you're called one of the premier musicians of his generation by Downbeat, regarded as the standard bearer of jazz basses in the 21st century. You're among the most recorded artists in modern music, which is amazing. I'm going to just read your bio here. 6-time Grammy winner, founder and leader of Christian McBride Big Band, Inside Straight Quintet, Christian McBride Trio. You've worked with an amazing array of artists from Sonny Rollins to Chaka Khan to Sting to the Shanghai Quartet. You're composer, educator, co-director, artistic advisor, radio host. And do you have time to do anything else? Like, do you sleep? Do you hang out?
Well, I'll tell you what, over the last 3 months, that's all I've been doing is sleeping.
Sleeping and hanging
It's been wonderful.
It's a nice break from the usual, right?
I'm telling you.
Yeah.
Yeah, all that stuff you just read off was nice, but I can't imagine what it must be like to stand in front of an orchestra and conduct. I mean, that is I applaud you. You are a badass. Excuse my French,
Oh,
but
yeah, whatever you want.
ever since the day I met you, I was like, oh man, this girl's badder than bad.
Oh, thanks.
I admire you.
Well, thank you. I mean, it is a strange thing to stand up in front of people and, you know, expect them to do what you want them to do. But you kind of do that too, right? In a way?
Yeah, well, except they don't listen to me. They're like, no, man, we don't want to do that.
Yeah. I have that problem sometimes, so I sympathize.
Really?
Yeah.
What section?
Which section? It's often the brass section. Yeah. You know, those guys can just be like, I want to play loud and do my thing.
Trumpets.
They can overpower. Like,
Trumpets. What is wrong with them?
I don't know. I think like all that air pressure like gets to their head, like changes their brain, you know?
I got to tell you something. The late, great drummer Billy Higgins, you actually quoted him verbatim without knowing it. He used to say all the time, he said, man, I used to see Lee Morgan, Freddie Hubbard, Dizzy Gillespie, they would do the craziest things. I think it has something to do with the air and about the trumpet, like would go and like mess up their brains or something.
I don't doubt it. You know, I think it must do something. Yeah, it's something to the ego too, right?
Yeah, well.
Yeah. So some background questions. So, you know, we have this whole story about how you came to find music and the bass. I mean, you come from a musical family, but what was the moment where you were like, this is something I want to do and really pursue, rather than it's all around me and it's great. You know what I mean?
Yeah. You know, watching my dad play often when I was a kid, I appreciated it, but I don't know, it didn't really sink in until this one concert. I was 8 years old, and my dad was playing at the Atlantic City Jazz Festival. He was playing with Mongo Santa Maria at that time, the legendary Cuban percussionist. And Dizzy Gillespie was a guest soloist with the band that night. And I don't know what it was. I think it wasn't Dizzy that got me. It wasn't Mongo that got me. I just think after watching my dad play so many times, it just finally it just that night, I said, I want to try this. I want to try to play the bass guitar like he's doing. My parents they were already separated by that time.
Mm-hmm.
So when I got home, I told my mother I wanted an electric bass for Christmas, and she got me one.
Wow.
And at that point, I knew what I was going to be doing for the rest of my life.
So that was it.
It was
Just
that simple.
moment. You got your
Yep.
electric guitar, the bass, and you're like, this is it.
Yeah.
Wow.
Yeah.
That's remarkable.
And then when I got to so I was 9, and my mother saw that I was very, I was into it. I was listening to all of her R&B and soul records and learning the bass lines from those recordings and whatever was popular on the radio at that time. And my mother said, "Oh, you're really serious about this." And so she sent me to a middle school in Southwest Philadelphia that was known for its music program, George Wharton Pepper Middle School. And that's when I started playing the big girl behind me.
There, yeah.
Yeah. And I interestingly enough, I didn't fall in love with the double bass right away. It took a while, took a few months.
Why
but
not? Why not?
I don't know. I guess because at age 11, it's cooler to play the bass guitar, you know. But after a few months, it just it got me, and I fell in love with it. And I started taking private lessons and playing in the orchestra, and learning jazz and classical music all at the same time.
So those two disciplines, I mean, they're different from a musical, just the stylistic standpoint, but from you as a musician, like, did you approach them differently, or was it like all the same? It was just playing is playing and music is music.
I think it was playing music is music. Like, I guess as a sports fan, it was, playing classical music and playing jazz and then playing pop or R&B. It was like baseball, football, basketball, like three different sports, but they're equally fun and entertaining, and there's a certain knowledge that you have to play those particular sports,
Yeah. I mean, you'd be hard pressed to find someone who can play football and basketball and baseball at that level. So, that says a lot about you, right?
Oh man, I think I'm moderately good at all three, just enough to hold a gig.
And many gigs at that. So then you went to Juilliard, which is like the epitome of, that's classical music. And you
went to Curtis.
I did. It's the yin to
with your bad self.
Yeah. But what was that like? And you were there for a year and then you left. So what's the story there?
Well, all through high school, I was playing as much classical music as I was jazz, and my mother made sure I stayed busy. She enrolled me in every after-school music program you can imagine. So Temple University had a youth orchestra. They had a youth chamber ensemble that I played in, and there was the All-City Orchestra. There was the Philadelphia Youth Orchestra. And so particularly when I started playing in the Philadelphia Youth Orchestra, my bass instructor, Neil Courtney, he said that, you might want to try getting into college for a classical bass program. I think you're good enough. And I didn't think so, but if he said I should try it, why not? In my heart, I knew that I had fallen madly in love with jazz. And in order to make it as a jazz musician, I had to go to New York because that's where everybody lived. And so because of that, I knew it was either the Juilliard School, the Manhattan School of Music, or the New School. It was one of those three.
Right.
And I won a full scholarship to Berkeley, and I turned it down, and I think my mother actually still gets like bent out of shape about that,
Yeah, I get it, yeah.
she said, well, wherever you go, you better do a good job. You really better do a good job. And so anyway, I took my audition at Juilliard and the Manhattan School of Music, and I got into I got my acceptance letter from the Manhattan School of Music fairly quickly. I mean, I got it like maybe within a week or two after I auditioned.
That's nice.
Juilliard, not so much. And I remember thinking, oh well, I guess I didn't get in. And like mid-July, or maybe toward the end of July, this huge envelope comes in the mail, and I still remember my mother's words. She says, "They don't turn you down in an envelope this big."
That's right. Yeah.
And yeah, I went to Juilliard, and I absolutely loved it. I learned so much there, even though I was only there for a year. Um, studying with the late great Homer Minch, and I got to tell you about the time Maestro Otto Werner Mueller cussed me out
Yes.
at rehearsal one day for falling asleep. I don't.
I can see that. So what did he say? He was famous for his little sayings.
Oh yeah, I don't remember what piece we were playing, but I'd been playing a gig all night the night before, and we would have orchestra rehearsals at like 8:30 in the morning, and so we had, I don't know, it was one of those pieces where the basses had like a 64 bar rest, and then we would come in with like 4 bars of a tied whole note and then lay out for 32 more bars.
A fun bass part, yeah.
I'm telling you. And so I, during this rest, I just kind of.
Were you subtle about it?
I thought so.
Okay.
But kids in college, they're jerks, so they just let me sleep. Nobody woke me up, and so, and then I hear this. Listen, McBride. I was like, oh,
oh my gosh. That woke you up.
Can I ask you a question? I said, yes, sir. I was like, oh no. Like, you probably had a gig last night or something. Is that what you jazz musicians call it? A gig? I said, yes, I had a gig last night. That does not excuse you from falling asleep during my rehearsal.
You laid down the law.
I was like, I'm sorry. You will not disrespect me again in my rehearsal. I was like, no, I will not, sir. I will not. Meanwhile, the bass section is like laughing. I'm like, man, you assholes. I'm going to get all of you after this rehearsal's over. Should have woke me up.
Get your revenge. Oh, man.
That's right.
That's great.
But then I wound up midway through, so the second semester started, and Roy Hargrove, may he rest in peace, called me to play in his first band. And I was also working with the alto saxophonist Bobby Watson. And so while I was in school, I started to, my calendar started to pick up quite a bit. And the summer after my freshman year, I started playing with Freddie Hubbard. And at that point, it became clear. I went, okay, I either got to stay playing these gigs with Freddie Hubbard and Roy Hargrove and all of these jazz legends who I'd hoped to play with, or I finished school. So I went to Homer Minch, and I told him my dilemma, and he was just so beautiful. He basically said, look, Freddie Hubbard won't be here forever. Juilliard will.
I love
that. Go play your gigs, and if you still want to study with me when you're in town, you're more than welcome to. But whatever you decide to do, I'll root for you.
That's amazing. Yeah.
And Homer Minch was a beautiful, beautiful man.
Wow. He let you go.
My mother eventually said that. She wasn't quite as well. What happened was I knew that Homer was only the first part. I then had to tell my mother that I didn't want to go back to Juilliard for my second year.
How'd she
So
take
I
it?
remember calling, yeah, I called her from a payphone and I said, Mom, hi, honey, how you doing? Like, Mom, what's the matter? Are you okay? Yeah, yeah, I'm fine. Listen, Mom, I've been working a lot of gigs and I have a really full calendar. Um, I don't think I want to continue with Juilliard. And it was like dead silence on the phone for
Yeah,
about
um,
like 60 straight minutes. I mean, like I'm sorry, 60 seconds,
and
but
you're
it felt like
sweating. You're
60
sweating.
minutes.
Yeah. Uh-huh.
Yeah. I'm like, Mom, are you there? She's like, yeah, I'm here. I'm like, uh-oh.
Oh my gosh.
And she said, where are you going to stay? I said, well, my friend Mark Carey has an apartment and he's got some rooms. So I was going to move in with him. And, then she's silent for another 30 seconds. She's like, well, I don't know this Mark Carey. I got to make sure he's cool. I was like, Mom, I swear he's cool. And then after more silence for about 2 minutes, she said, well, if I raised you the right way, I, I trust you're making the right decision and you'll know how to handle yourself. And that was that.
Wow.
So I dedicate my career to my mom for
Yeah. Thank you, Mom.
trusting me,
Yeah. Yeah.
you know.
Exactly. I just saw a question from one of our viewers. What do you think of the term jazzer? Is the question.
Non-jazz people use that phrase.
Nice.
Nobody in the jazz world calls each other jazzer.
So what do you call
So
yourself?
I mean, I don't mind it if you use jazzer, but that's a dead giveaway that you're not really a jazz person.
Love it. There's your answer, whoever asked that question.
That's
So
right.
you're really known for creating these like cross-pollinating styles, like fusion and funk, and bringing together elements that don't necessarily always go together. So, like, what's the thought process behind getting that to happen, and like, what's the inspiration?
Um, I don't know. I think growing up around a lot of different styles of music and practicing all of these different styles of music simultaneously, I don't think I ever had any conscious thought of melding anything
Mm-hmm.
together. That's just kind of how I hear it, you know.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm.
Um, I never thought, well, let me consciously take a little James Brown and mix it with some hard silver and maybe a little Ravel, you know.
An interesting recipe. I like that.
Right, right. I just whatever I'm feeling at the moment, I just kind of go for it. I do wish I could break this habit of I second and third guess myself too often.
Mm.
Um, it's difficult for me to compose, and I try real hard to break out of that. I realize it's a personal issue because when I write music, um, I can't help but think of all of my favorite composers.
Mm-hmm.
Like in the back of my brain, I'm thinking, man, I'll never be as good as Wayne Shorter. I'll never be as good as Chick Corea. Why am I even writing a song? Just stop writing. And then the other part of my brain is like, stop doing that. Will you please stop? Just write the song. And I start writing, and I'm like, oh, the guys in the band are going to think this is corny. Um, am I making the best use of this melodic, of this motif here? So yeah, I have a lot of mental blocks when I'm writing, not to get out of that.
I mean, I think it's remarkable to hear someone like you who has been in the industry, you've done so much, written so much, people have so much respect for, and you're saying I have these moments of self-doubt, right? Where you're like,
All the time.
can you speak to that? Like, and how do you overcome that? Like in all venues?
Well, it's interesting because there's a school of thought. I used to hear this from both Betty Carter and Bobby Hutcherson. They used to rail against. I don't want to word this the wrong way, but they didn't like that a lot of the younger generation were historians, and the fact that we listen to records all the time.
Mm-hmm.
You know, in order to learn about the music, we listened to all these records. We studied all of these styles, studied all of these songs, analyzed all of these different improvisational styles and methods. I remember Betty Carter used to say, "Stop doing that because you're subconsciously that's going to get too deep in your psyche, and you're not going to be able to break away from that when you start trying to develop yourself." And then there was another school of thought that says you need to gather all of the information that you possibly can. So you just have more colors to work with. You have more history to work with. You actually know how to contextualize and conceptualize different styles and theories. And so it was like a tug of war for me as a young player, just trying to put all that together. So I can't unlearn what I've already learned. I mean, like I feel like I could probably sing every recorded VJ albums to the songs that he wrote for Art Blakey and the Jazz Messengers, to Miles Davis, to his own solo albums on Blue Note, to Weather Report, to his own solo albums after Weather Report. I love his music that much. So I can't unhear that.
Right,
you know.
Right, yeah.
Or like playing with Chick Corea for the last 21 years, you know. Or actually, no, I'm sorry, 24 years. And I watch how Chick, and I mean this when I say it. If you tell Chick Corea, hey, look, you got 60 minutes to write a symphony, or I'm going to kill your family, right? Chick Corea will compose 2 in 60 minutes. That's how prolific he is, right? And I look at him like, man, how do you do that? And it's killing.
Yeah.
You know, Pat Metheny is like that, you know. And it's like, man, I can't do that. And then so I've learned how to break myself. I really have to I literally talk to myself like, okay, stop second guessing yourself. Right, damn it, right. Just write. It's okay. Just write, you know.
Yeah.
And then a little drink also helps.
Relaxes you a little bit, gets the creative juices
Oh yeah,
flowing.
vodka does wonders for my writing process.
I think it does for everyone's writing process, you know. Like, you know, I come from the classical background, and we always feel this like a curatorial responsibility to present the great works of our art, but also needing to like keep moving forward. Like, are you aware of that dichotomy? Is that something you got to deal with regularly?
Well, you know, I don't know if this is the right time for this, but I've always wanted to ask you about that, because I think jazz and classical music suffers from the same thing. Like, you have to walk this tightrope all the time. Like, people always demand that you always keep it fresh. You play new things. You try to explore new territory. But if you do that too often, people just won't show up. So you got to play something that they're familiar with.
Yeah.
You know. And so I often wonder how you, my friend, I mean, I talk to so many people in the symphonic world, and you guys are really dealing with. I mean, you talk about an inherited sort of structure that is hard to tear down. You know what I mean? Like, you guys got to get that big money from all those donors, and they don't give big money for new composers. They give it for Bach and Beethoven, you know? And it's like, man, we got to get to the new stuff.
Yeah.
So that's why I commend you for, I know we both worked with Sting, you know? And I'm mad that we didn't do the Symphonicities project at the same time.
Yeah.
I think I just missed you by like a couple of gigs, doggone it.
You must have been. That would have been awesome.
I remember we played with the Chicago Symphony, and and like I overheard a conversation between two veterans in the orchestra, and this is kind of what we're dealing with. And I remember hearing these two. I think one of them was a French horn player, had been there for a very, very long time, and I'm paraphrasing, but it was just like, I hate doing these kind of gigs, these stinking rock gigs. I hate this, and part of me thought, like, this is hardly a rock gig, This is not, self-mutilation on stage in mosh pits, This is some very tasteful music here, And Dave Hartley conducted the show that night, and I felt so bad for him because he was shaking. He was so nervous. This legendary orchestra, and like the old veterans are just giving him shit, and I just felt so bad.
Yeah. And
I just really wanted to say, like, this concert is going to help you old folks stay in business. So shut up and play the music, So yeah, I think we both have to walk a tightrope in our curatorial demands and responsibilities. So I commend you, my friend.
Well, thank you. We got to try. Otherwise, the art form kind of stagnates and it doesn't go anywhere. So,
I also want to commend you on this. I saw this awesome YouTube video of you. You were doing like a conductor's masterclass, and you had the little kids sitting on the side of the stage.
Yeah.
I love that.
That was fun. You got to try all kinds of things, and sort of find ways of expression for what you do and bring people into what you love and have them love it too. So, that's an important part of what we do.
Right.
Hugely important.
Well,
hey, I have a question for you from one of our viewers. Why do you think many jazz acoustic bassists use the bow so infrequently, if at all?
Because we're so poor at it. That's why.
Simple answer.
I will say that inside of the last 20 years, you probably have, or well, at least in the modern era. And when I say the modern era, I think of people like John Clayton or, George Mraz was a really good arco player. Larry Grenadier. Like I said, I'm moderately okay. I don't know. I feel that the bow, it really is, it really does expose all of the like minuscule weaknesses in your playing. You really got to practice the bow all the time. And as jazz players, it's just not a necessity for us to play the bow every day.
Right.
But if you really want to get better at it, like anything else in life, you got to really make it a point to practice it every day.
Yeah.
As you can see, I've been shedding hard.
Well, look at you.
I'm doing this thing with Gary Carr on Sunday evening.
Oh.
And that's like playing one-on-one with Michael Jordan.
Yeah.
If Edgar Meyer is Kobe Bryant, then Gary Carr is Michael Jordan.
Yeah, exactly. Wow. How's that? What's that like?
Well, I got to tell you, we're doing a Zoom duet. And I don't know about Zoom duets. The technology has not quite caught up yet.
No, the timing is off. But yeah, okay.
Exactly. I think people will appreciate the imperfections, though. We're going to play a rubato version of Joshua Fit the Battle of Jericho.
Ah.
Yeah.
That's
so
really cool.
It'll be fun.
Yeah. Another viewer question. How was your experience in Cuba?
Cuba. That was absolutely amazing. I went to Cuba in 2016. What was it was a festival. I went down there with my trio, and I also got to play with the legendary Chucho Valdez.
Mm.
I got to sit in with his band for a couple of tunes, and oh my gosh, it was just we stayed there for I think we were there for a week, and there's one thing about Cuba that I find interesting. Like I, there's so many great pianists down there.
Mm. Mm-hmm.
The knowledge of their their art,
Mm-hmm.
like visual artists, musicians, they are the heroes. They're the real cultural heroes
Mm-hmm.
of Cuba. And so I remember doing a master class at some school, and the person who was running the master class, it was so hilarious. I said, "Will there be a young pianist who might want to come up and join me?" And she basically said, like, "Yeah, pick anybody. They all play piano, and they're all good, and they all know your stuff." I went, "All of them?" He said, "Yeah, all of them." And so maybe I would say maybe 100 people showed up to this master class, and I just randomly picked this one kid, and
Mm-hmm.
he came up and killed it. I went, "Wow, is this what Cuba's dealing with?" Man, can you imagine if every kid in America it was a demand to learn how to play the piano?
Can't imagine. Unimaginable.
You you need to know who Thelonious Monk and Bud Powell are, or you don't graduate from high school. Wouldn't that be amazing?
Wouldn't that be amazing? It would. It would. I mean, I think it would be a better country if that were the case, or we
Yeah.
get along better.
You need to know who Pablo Picasso or Romare Bearden or you don't get your credits for graduation. Oh,
Yeah, it would we would be such better human beings if we all had knowledge of,
yeah. I
beauty.
wonder why America doesn't have a minister of culture. So many countries in the world have that except us.
That's a good question. Well, we have no unified national culture, and like the only art
We're
form
too worried about money.
yeah. And but if you think
Culture
about
culture to America is what makes money.
it, well, that's true. It is very, we are this society that really values certain things over others, but
Yeah.
it would be great if it would change. Like in that vein, you do a lot of, like educational things, like being, I'm just reading what you've done, just, artistic director at Aspen, creative chair of jazz at LA Phil, and you have this, what's it called? Jazz House Kids. So you want to sort of
Yes.
be able to spread your knowledge and that love of art and culture and great American art to another generation. Can you sort of speak to that?
Well, I now realize that one of the reasons that I fell in love with jazz so much and that I dedicated myself to jazz is because so many of the working musicians who were on these records that I admired so much, uh, I didn't know it then, but they would take time out of their busy tour schedules and they would come and give master classes and talk to us when we were in high school. And I saw Max Roach give like 3 master classes when I was in high school. Dr. Billy Taylor would come in and give lectures and workshops and clinics. Grover Washington Jr., Kenny Barron, um, all kinds of great musicians. And I realized, particularly once I got older and started to become a touring musician, there's not a lot of time in your day when you have a
Mm-hmm.
gig that night. You
Right,
got
right.
sound check, you might have interviews to do, whatever. So when I realized what what a sacrifice, all of
Mm-hmm.
those great musicians were making so
Right.
they could make sure they came and talked to us,
Mm-hmm.
I I thought this was a no-brainer. I gotta pay it forward,
Yeah.
If I'm ever in the same position, that's what I'm going to do. And then when I met my wife, um, she had just started this organization called Jazz House Kids,
Mm-hmm.
uh, dedicated to jazz education for young people.
Mm-hmm.
And so she said, will you please help me build this? I said, are you kidding? I'm all in, So
Yeah.
Education's been very good to me,
Mm-hmm.
but also it's very good for me because I realize that there is an art and a skill to teaching, which I
Mm-hmm.
don't think I have. But by the same token, I think a lot of younger musicians just like they like hearing the stories. They like knowing what your experiences are.
Mm-hmm.
You know
Mm-hmm.
what I mean? So and I remember sitting around somebody like a Jimmy Heath or a Curtis Fuller. Um, by anyone's standards, I'm not sure, or somebody like Jimmy Smith, who was like by far the most inappropriate person I'd ever met in my whole life. But because he was a legend, his stories, that sort of experience,
Mm-hmm.
it was good for us, you know.
Yeah. Interesting. So, well, when talking to educators and they talk about the fact that when you have to explain or share what you do, that it makes them, and I teach too, and this really happens, it forces you to really think of what it is that you're doing in a different way, right? Because you have to externalize and be able to explain to someone what you
Right.
sort of thoughtlessly do. Do you experience that too?
Absolutely. Yeah. In fact, I did a series. There's a platform called Open Studio, which was started by my friend Peter Martin, great pianist. And he got all of these amazing uh, jazz musicians to do basically these master classes. And, you're there with multiple cameras and, you got angle shots, making sure they get, your hand positions.
Mm-hmm.
And there I am thinking, okay, I have to now share what I know, some of which I just kind of figured it out, you know, and like, okay, how do I share that now with people who are going to spend their hard-earned money
Mm-hmm.
buying a digital, like a high definition lesson with Christian McBride. So
Mm-hmm.
um, it really makes me think really hard about how do I take all of this
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm.
and express it verbally and demonstrate it on my instrument. So I think I've gotten a little better at it. At least I like to think so. But oh yeah, it's something to think about when you're teaching, when you're in
Yeah.
teaching mode.
Yeah. Yeah. Viewer has a question. Says, share one Jimmy Smith story.
Um, do you save these? Well, I mean, it doesn't really matter because anything that goes on the internet is somebody's gonna save it. Let's see, Jimmy Smith.
Yeah, I do save them just to let you know. But
Okay, let me see if I can give you a clean Jimmy Smith story. Not really. Wait a minute. Give me a second.
oh yeah, you got it.
Um,
I think this is amazing that you have to spend this much time thinking about a clean story.
yeah. Um, okay. Yeah. Well. Yeah. Okay. 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 I got one for you. I got one for you. Um, yeah. So in the mid '90s, Jimmy Smith uh, was signed to Verve Records. Verve Records had a really great resurgence in the '90s, and they'd signed people like Betty Carter and Abby Lincoln and Shirley Horn, Joe Henderson, Bobby Hutcherson. As they also had a lot of the young guys like myself and Roy Hargrove and Stephen Scott. Um, so they signed Jimmy Smith. That was a big catch for them, and they wanted to do a Jimmy Smith All Star record. And they put Jimmy Smith with me, the late Arthur Taylor on drums, uh, Bernard Purdy also on drums, Roy Hargrove, Nicholas Payton, Tim Warfield. I mean, so many people were on this album. Mark Whitfield played guitar. And so Jimmy refused to play each day unless he had a six pack of beer. And so the session started at 11 o'clock in the morning, you
Okay.
know,
Yeah, yeah.
and so he would arrive at the studio and he would tell the producer, Richard Seidel, Richard, where's my beer? God damn it. Where's my beer? So, so um, Richard would go out and get him a 6-pack, and we play 1 or 2 takes, and before we knew it, that 6-pack was gone in like just 2 takes.
Boom, boom. Yeah.
And so we do 2 or 3 takes, and Richard's like, let's do another song. And Jimmy would look down and see all his beer was gone. He's like, I need some more beer, Richard. Where's my beer, Richard? Go get my beer, damn it. Right? So
yeah.
By the end of the day, so we recorded from like 11 a.m. to about 7 p.m. that night. I'm telling you, there were about 50 beer bottles at the bottom of the organ. I'm not lying.
That is
I mean, Jimmy had he drank about, I don't know, about 6 or 7 6-packs that day, and all day the next day, and all day the day after that. So in 3 days, he probably drank about like over 100 beers. And and so when we would take a break, like when we have a lunch, and he didn't get drunk. Well, then again, it was kind of hard to tell when Jimmy was drunk sometimes. But he would tell us stories on the lunch break, and he would just have us all dying laughing, and really bad, inappropriate stories. I certainly will not tell them now, but no. And so the lunch break was only supposed to be an hour. So like after an hour and a half, Jimmy still has us spellbound telling us these stories, about Art Blakey, all these people. And Richard's like, hey, Jimmy, we need to go back and work. It's time to go back to work. Richard, leave me alone. You just get my beer. You shut up. Don't you tell me when you're ready to start. I'll tell you when I'm ready to start. What are you, some kind of slave master? Yes, sir, boss. It's time to go back to work, boss. Yes, sir, boss. Like, Jimmy, give the man a break. Boy, he just cussed Richard Seidel up and down the wall all day long.
All day long.
Just shut up and get my beer, Richard. I need more beer.
Oh, man.
Had iPhones existed back then, cameras existed back then, but
yeah,
I wish I could have taken a picture of that sea of beer bottles at the bottom of the organ at the end of the day. I never saw anything like it.
Wow. We'll just have to, keep that in your mind's memory.
That's right.
Shot.
And next time you see a picture of Jimmy Smith, just remember the phrase, just get my beer, Richard.
Just get my beer. That's all I'm going to be able to think of. So I'm going to say something kind of serious, because I really want to get your take on this. I mean, we as a nation now are grappling with these incredibly...
We're in the toilet. That's where we are.
But we're dealing with these painful events that are, causing this, again, soul searching that comes up again about just, necessary soul searching of what the heck is going on. And, you as an artist, or an artist in general, what is your response to what's happening in this country? And what should an artist's response be? What can an artist do?
Sarah, I don't think any of us have any real solid answers on any of this, because it's really hard to have a intellectual approach on how to first of all, to recognize what the problem is and how to fix the problem, but then to have the emotional response to what happens from all of this, And I've always tried to be one of these type of people. I try not to be too much of a reactionary person, because I've learned that sometimes when you're a little too reactionary, you could regret what you're doing. And so I've learned how to, if something is really stirring my emotions, to kind of step back, breathe real hard, chant, say a prayer, do whatever you're going to do, assess what's going on, and try to figure out how to help the solution. right? And so what's going on in our country right now? If you know anything about the history of our country, you realize that what our country now is displaying insanity, literally insanity, in the sense of you repeat the same things over and over again, and somehow you expect a different outcome. You know what I mean? So like when you see a police officer kill someone and it's on camera, you know, like the George Floyd murder, that's an old story, sadly. I think most African American people in this country, we see that George Floyd video and it's sort of like, this is version 8,412 of this same story, right? Now, I think what exacerbated it was the Amy Cooper video, because I think for many, when you think of the phrase white privilege, what example could be greater than that? You know what I mean? Here's a woman who was not threatened. She was not being harmed. She was simply inconvenienced and offended that someone would dare tell her to put her dog on a leash. And the fact that this was an African American man to somehow suggest that she follow the rules, or I'm going to call the cops on you because you know what they do to African American males. See, that is it uncovers two things. It uncovers what white privilege actually is and how she's using the systemic brutalization of police towards African American males in her favor, simply because she didn't feel like putting her dog on the leash. You know what I mean? Just something as small as that. So what can an artist do? If you're looking at something that deep, pragmatically, maybe nothing, probably nothing. But by the same token, I'm paraphrasing. It was Leonard Bernstein's quote says, in times like this, we must play. I can't remember the phrase. You know it.
Music
about playing
more
with
beautifully and with more, you know,
That's right.
Yes.
That's right. And by the same token, I think about what James Brown did in the summer of 1968 when he made "Say It Loud, I'm Black and I'm Proud." That song did so much to uplift the morale of the Black community, but it didn't kill racism. So how do we kill racism? And I always feel like there's a really great story I read by Bill Bradley. Bill Bradley's former New York Knick, who became a respected politician. And he said that when he started playing with the New York Knicks in the 60s, he was probably one of very few white players on the team. And he said it was a new experience for him, not being the majority voice, not being the person who was now in the position to be looked at funny, and like he now knew what it felt like to be on the other side,
right? To be
and it was interesting that's right, and it was interesting that Bill Bradley said, that experience really taught me empathy. Like, I know now what it feels like to be in a room and be eyeballed funny. People are talking in code around you. People don't really care what you think, but you still have to somehow be in harmony with these people when you when you have a job to do. And he said for that reason he will always he always bonded with the Black community and really tried to let the Black community know that he was there with them. So with people who practice this kind of subtle and non-subtle racism, be in our shoes. What would it feel like if that was your son or your daughter or your cousin or your friend that you see on the news once a month with a cop shooting them, that person's unarmed, or you see a cop with a knee on your throat choking you to death, and like it just happened to be someone you knew, like a white person.
Hmm.
Every month you saw that. Every week you saw some, like you would be crying, you'd be angry, you want to take action, you want to do something about it. So um, I'm I'm trying to figure out not only what can I do as an artist, but what can I do as a citizen.
Hmm.
And I think empathy is sort of the way. I want to make it like a cultural exchange should be mandatory in American culture. The 1% needs to go live in the projects for like
Hmm.
6 months.
Yeah.
You know what I mean? Uh, the 1% should have all their privileges taken away from them for 6 months just to see how it feels.
Hmm.
You
Hmm.
know what I mean? I guarantee it'll come back going, oh man, we didn't realize it was like this, you know?
Yeah. Well, there's this
So
understanding, and
sorry for my long answer.
no, no, no. I think it's an interesting and necessary answer. And I like that you bring up this notion of empathy, because I feel like, art and music is about being empathic and putting yourself in someone else's shoes and being able to express things that we can each understand from each other. So, I love what you're saying with that. Um,
I really wish it would be mandatory, because I it's so funny that part of my two of my artistic directorships in this music. Now let's think. Jazz is an African American art form that was born out of the African American experience.
mhm,
Two of the largest jazz organizations that I'm involved in are based in Aspen, Colorado, and
mhm,
Newport, Rhode Island.
mhm.
Not necessarily two towns you think of when you think of the African American
Yeah.
experience. So, how do I get? I mean, and I feel like it's incumbent upon me to somehow now bring that experience. I mean, well, with Newport, it's a little different because there's been a jazz festival there for now 66 years.
Mhm,
Well, this would have been the
mhm,
66th year of the Newport Jazz Festival. So I think that town really did get diversified for at least
mhm.
3 days out of the year every
Right.
year. But how do we make that last beyond the
Mhm.
festival? How
Yeah.
do we make
Hmm.
it last in a town like Aspen, Colorado, beyond the time when I'm there for the
Right.
summer
Right.
for
Yeah.
their jazz festival? So I'm trying to figure that out.
Yeah.
You know what I mean?
Hmm. We just got a couple minutes left here, but I really want to ask you, I ask all my guests this question. When you're on your deathbed
Yes.
and you're looking back at your life,
Oh
what,
boy.
what do you want to, what would you want to have done in the world? Like, it doesn't have to be one thing. It could be a feeling. It could, it can be anything that you can look back and say, I did good. I did something.
Boy. That's a rough one.
And it doesn't have to be one thing. It could, be as simple as, I don't know. Mine is like, I want to impact, if I can impact one person's life and make them feel that they're okay, then I've done
I,
something.
well, I think I want to do what I started doing about 10 years ago. And I feel like my job as a band leader slash mentor is not simply just to have good bands.
Mm-hmm.
I think my job is to make sure younger musicians get an opportunity to experience the road
Mm-hmm.
and really be out there, like getting their hands dirty and grinding it and know what it means to get out there and play in front of people all over the world. So it's been a joy for me to introduce the world to people like Christian Sands
Mm-hmm.
and Warren Wolf and Josh Evans. And I mean, I want to be able to continue to sort of
Mhm.
bring up young musicians,
Yeah.
you know. So when I'm on my deathbed, um, hopefully they will be doing the same thing to younger musicians
Yeah.
coming up on the scene,
Yeah.
you know.
That's beautiful. I love that. Christian, it's
And I'm
been so
sure at some point, I'm sure at some point on my deathbed, I'm going to say,
Oh, we just cut out. Ah, come back, Christian. Looks like we've lost Christian, or maybe you've lost me. Okay, guys, I really want to say thank you so much to Christian McBride, who has disappeared momentarily. A good hour. And he left. He's gone. Let's see if we can bring him back. Christian, it was such a great conversation. This is, oh wait, he's back. Waiting for Christian, connecting.
sorry
Hey,
about that.
disappeared. That's okay. That's okay. I just want to say thank you so much for your
That's
work.
what I get for doing this whole thing on my Android.
See, there you go. That'll teach you, right?
Yeah, that'll teach you, right?
Yeah.
I'm black. I mean, I'm back.
You can always make me smile. Thanks, man. Thanks for being on. Thanks for sharing. Thanks for the great stories. And you know, it's great to see you. I hope we can work together again when all of this ends. And sorry for that abrupt ending to that IG live. We actually got kicked off because we went over an hour, and the conversation was phenomenal and so interesting that we lost track of time. We actually FaceTimed each other afterwards to catch up even more because it's been so long since we have been able to talk. Hope you enjoyed that. Thanks so much for joining me, and we'll see you soon.